Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you are doing really well today. Today we're going to embark on a rather ambitious project, but hopefully we will deliver. I propose to provide a new description of introverted intuition, a reinterpretation of NI, for your interest, and you let me know what you think of it. I should mention that some of the fruits of my reflections in this video are also part of a bigger context of my writing the new book. So if you want to have more in-depth reflections and an more developed thread, that really paints a whole picture of a rethought INFJ and NI dominant in this case, you should keep up to date with the publication of the new book. I've been asking if you would be interested in the publication date being April instead of September. Keep letting me know, please. If you haven't got my first book on the INFJ, The Ecstatic Soul, get a copy. Link is below, less than $10. It's the authoritative book on the INFJ until now, and the sequel will make it even more authoritative. And you also have The Infinite Castle, by the way, which is a book I wrote 2 years ago now, a fiction book. Murakami, Kafka, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, if these names speak to you and you'd be interested in an INFJ protagonist, you might just like it. Link is below, and you can also support me on Patreon. Thank you so much to my supporters. The link is right there. Supports the channel a lot, by the way, so don't hesitate to provide even a modest level of support. Now, so we want to propose a reinterpretation of introverted intuition, a redescription of introverted intuition. So before I proceed with this, just for a few moments, let's think about why this is a worthy enterprise. I speak a lot about this in my new book. My new book, when you get it, you'll notice that one of the descriptions that I propose for the INFJ is to call the INFJ a meaning-making being, a person who specializes in the making of new meanings. This might sound mysterious, but the book delves into this. But essentially, one way you could look at this is to consider that the world as we know it has two essential components. From this particular angle that I'm going to take, it can have two essential components. The world exists insofar as it's the physical universe, okay, where we exist, and we can give a scientific description of that. And it also exists as a world of meanings, that imbue our lives with purpose, with relationships, with emotions, with values, all of those things that have an intrinsically qualitative texture which cannot be rendered in scientific language. And this is a very broad domain as well, and so if we wanted to be a little bit, if we wanted to resort to caricature, we would say that in order to live a good life in today's world, just like in the world of the past, you need to combine material well-being with spiritual well-being. And by spiritual here, I mean in the broad sense, meaningfulness of life, right? Material well-being by itself, without meaning, you'll suffer. And that's the case of a lot of Western secular societies nowadays. In the past, perhaps, especially with the anchoring of religion, which is a path to a world of meanings, not the only one nowadays, but in the past was dominant, perhaps it was more the material aspect that was lacking. In any case, I think the INFJ has a role to play, potentially along the two roads: the increased level of description of the scientific world. We have INFJs among well-known physicists and mathematicians. Henri Poincaré was an INFJ mathematician. Niels Bohr is usually seen as an INFJ physicist. So not to say that INFJs don't have a role to play in the progress toward a physical description of the universe as it is physically. But I think that they have more of a role to play ultimately in terms of continuing to provide descriptions and interpretations of the meaningfulness of existence. And then there's an infinite repository of this. And I think that's where NI has a key role to play. And that's the angle that I just want to put a laser focus on right now. Too often in the pop psychological publications we find on the internet mostly, but also in some pop psychological books, we hear that NI is the vision of the future. I'm slightly exaggerating, but you get my point. It's a slogan, it appeals to people, but ultimately you want to ask yourself, does that really mean anything? And once you start looking at the people who can be said to have visions nowadays, you look at the world's most rich men, or the political leaders that have, the sort of most influential CEOs, or the political leaders that have the most vision. You're thinking, okay, where are the INFJs here? So clearly there is something different that is meant. You know that I like the word prescience, which means that for someone to possess NI, someone to strongly feel like they are touching something that they cannot quite express. So it's a state of feeling that one knows rather than a state of knowing. It's a fundamental difference. And it's the first thing that I want, again, to bring into my reinterpretation of introverted intuition. In terms of qualitative phenomenology, it's not a state of knowing. By the way, that's not a phenomenology, but NI does not imply foreknowledge. It does not imply knowledge. It implies, at the experiential level, a feeling that one knows. It's fundamental, because the fact that you have this conviction in your bones is going to have an impact on your worldview and your behavior. But it is not knowledge, it's a conviction. It's an emotional state. It's a mental emotional state rather than a knowledge state. Okay, so that's the first element of the redescription. And so in my book, I explore that in more detail, and to some degree, I explore that in The Ecstatic Soul as well. But there's more to NI, of course, than just a feeling that one knows. If you like, the feeling that you know, the feeling that you have something in your bones that you've touched, even though you can't quite express it, has a cause. And the cause is that NI puts you in touch with, Jung says, NI puts you in touch with the archetypes, okay? The archetypes correspond to not abstract ideas. That's the Platonic interpretation, it's the Platonic version of the archetypes, which is different from what Jung says. In the Platonic idea, archetypes are indeed abstract, fundamental, universal ideas. In the Jungian interpretation, the archetypes are not ideas, with a capital I. They're not concepts, they're not abstractions, they're actually concretions. The archetypes are hyperdense condensations of experiences that have been gathered over hugely vast stretches of time, and they're in your psyche. That's the postulation of Jung, that's a hypothesis of Jung. Now, it's a concretion, but it's so condensed, it's like eternity has gathered time into a single moment in your mind, or rather at the back, sort of unconscious level of your mind. It's something that guides us. They guide us in order to, allow us to cope with the world in various ways. They perform a function that is at a different pole, but not too dissimilar to, the mechanisms of natural selection, but they operate at the psychic level. The idea is that NI puts you in touch, very closely in touch with archetypal symbolism, because the archetype, being a hyper-condensed kind of thing, is in symbolic form. Again, it's not an abstract sign, it's a symbol, it's concrete. But since it's hyper-condensed, it's hard to read. When an INFJ is faced, and an INTJ too, by the way, is faced with a particular situation in the world, they always have this NI tendency to compare it with the insights, elusive but nevertheless pregnant insights of the archetype. And the fact that they have this reference point that they can go back towards allow them to look at new events and new situations in ways that are informed by something that is so comprehensive that they can bring a new perspective on the event. In other words, they can bring new meaning to the event for the overall population, starting by themselves. Because it's a new meaning, and because the archetype that is one of the sources of that perception is hyper-condensed, elusive, the meaning is initially going to be extremely difficult to express. It's going to be metaphorically expressed. And we all know that, right? NI expresses itself metaphorically, which is why some hard-nosed scientists don't take the formulations of NI users too seriously, because they're too metaphorical for them. They're not transparent enough. The cult of science, of technology, is the cult of transparent reason. It's the cult of the idea that you are all the more insightful, knowledgeable, intelligent to the extent that you can articulate your thoughts transparently. And this is something that has been so influential as a paradigm in our culture that we take it for granted as true a lot of the time. It's a picture that holds us captive, as Wittgenstein would say. So The fundamental idea is that transparency of articulation means that we have transparency of thought, and that leads to knowledge, and by the way, intelligence and competence and scientific credibility. It's not really how NI works. NI works more in terms of having an elusive grasp of something that can be experienced in a new way by being described in a new way. It's a work of the archetype and the creativity and acuity of the NI user himself or herself, NI lead particularly. So what I say in the book is that NI is not about it's not about the creation by anticipation of new human knowledge. It's more about the creation by inspiration of new human meanings. So we're concerned more so with new meanings, new ways of world making, as Nelson Goodman would say, than we're looking at new knowledge. Of course, it can contribute to knowledge, but the focus is meanings. And usually, initially, those meanings are not going to be accepted by everybody because they are, well, first of all, they are quite personal to the person who expresses them, and they haven't been publicly accepted yet as a new meaning. This brings us to maybe the last element that I want to talk about is that, linguists are fond of saying that our languages are full of dead metaphors. And what they mean by this is that they're full of metaphors that have become so well worn through repeated use that they're just accepted into our language, and so they're no longer considered as a metaphor. I'm just going to use one example that a friend used recently. We're walking by the beach, and my friend said, "Oh my God, the beach today, it's really black with people." And as you can guess, it's not that recently, it was actually last summer. That's why the beach was very busy. It says the beach is black with people. Now, all of us understand what this means. We don't think of it as a metaphor. It's a dead metaphor because it used to be a metaphor, meaning that there was a time when the idea that something was black with people or black with something else would have been confusing. We think it's very clear now. We think that it's obvious what it means. But at some point, black with, what does that mean? That was the time when the metaphor was still a metaphor and hadn't yet been inducted into public language. Take this example to consider that this is what NI does. Sometimes the metaphors are successfully inducted into our language, adding to meanings, to public meanings. Sometimes they're not accepted because maybe they're too idiosyncratic or whatever. But, INFJs, this place is black with people. That's what INFJs do all the time, or at least that's what their innermost potential leads them to do. That's what NI does. It's the creation and reinvention and redescription of new, conducive to new human meanings. So INFJs have a role to play in keeping meaning alive in the world, the spiritual side of quality of life next to material well-being. Majority of INFJs will be more oriented to spiritual well-being in the sense of keeping meanings alive, what I sometimes call the sacred, a site of things that have meaning regardless of the means and thinking we have towards them, the instrumental use we make of them. They have meaning in and of themselves. And to keep the world meaningful is to keep the repository of meaning well nourished, exactly like to keep a language alive is to keep its stock of new metaphors well nourished. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys, and I will see you next Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.